What a privilege to be here for a second time. The Apostle Paul, he said, I'm coming to you the third time. But the first time you come, it's faith. When somebody invites you the first time. Second time, if you come, it's hope. Third time, it'll be charity. So maybe we'll get a chance to come back a third time. But what a privilege to be here this morning. And what I get a chance to do is share stories. And I love telling stories because stories are the way we get to know each other. You tell me a little bit about yourself, and I tell you a little bit about me, and we get to know each other. And I mentioned this morning that it was neat meeting Mitch, but I realized right away that he's missing his right hand. And in getting to share with him, I would obviously want to tell him about my dad, who lost his right hand when he was a boy, and went on with life and accomplished wonderful things. So as we share those details of our lives with each other and the things that are similar about us, that's the way our lives then interconnect, and our stories become intertwined. And that's what forms community, when you then trust each other enough to be able to share those intimate parts of your life, those details that then make you into a community, and they bond you together. Now, God did a wonderful thing in that He wrote a book. He gave us a story and a way to get to know Him. And His story is the way we share Him with other people. Now, a little bit of my story is that I developed telling these sand stories about 10 years ago when I was pastoring a church. And it was when my wife sent me to the hardware store to get some mulch for the garden. And I had been pastoring the church, but I wanted to incorporate the arts, because that's the way people would remember what I said. I'd heard the statistics that people will remember 30% of what they hear, but 80% of what they hear and see. And so I'd done drawings and pastels and acrylics and all sorts of things like that. And those images helped people remember. So I'd been there 5 years. Easter was coming up. I wanted to tell the Easter story in a new way. And so I was down at the hardware store looking for mulch, and I was walking down the aisle where they had bags of sand, and somebody had ripped open the bag of sand and spilled it out on the floor, and people had scuffed through it. And as an artist, you see images everywhere. And so I started dragging my toe through the sand thinking, maybe I can do something with this. So I got home with a mulch, but I also had a sack full of sand and a kitchen light fixture, and I cobbled this crazy thing together in my garage and got a handy cam and duct taped it to a tripod and plugged it into my television set, and sure enough, the images started coming together, and I did my first sand story performance. It was the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. People in the congregation said very nice things about it, but then, as you know, a congregation is supposed to say nice things to the pastor, right? And I just kind of chalked it away. But shortly after that, the Lord had made it obvious that pastoring was really not my best fit, and He had something else for me. So we stepped down from the pastorate, and I started performing these sand stories, and the phone started ringing. Some of my clips got on YouTube, and then the phone rang, and it was America's Got Talent. Now, I'd never had any interest in being on television or being a, quote, celebrity, and so I turned them down. But my wife, who's the brighter one of the two, after they called the third time, finally said, Joe, honey, look, just go down and try out. I mean, what do you got to lose? Maybe God's going to open a door that He wants you to go through. So I said, okay. And they flew me down to Austin, Texas, and I tried out. But see, I knew what would happen, because I knew that the three judges that summer were Howie Mandel, Sharon Osbourne, and Howard Stern. And the only sand story piece that I had that I could condense to 90 seconds, and that's all they give you is 90 seconds, was God Bless the USA by Lee Greenwood. So Howie Mandel, I knew he'd give me an X because he's Canadian. Sharon Osbourne, she's British. And Howard Stern, I didn't even know if he believed in God or not. So I figured I'd get 3 X's, get sent home, boom, that'd be the end of it. God would close the door. But that's not what happened. The 3 judges actually stood up and gave me a standing ovation. Howard Stern said, "Joe, that gave me goosebumps." I thought, whoa, maybe there's hope for Howard Stern yet. Pray for him. God saved King Nebuchadnezzar. He could save Howard Stern. Performed God Bless the USA was what got me passed on all the way to the finals in America's Got Talent. But I performed it hundreds of times around the country and always had a great time doing it, always a great response. But just last week, I got a chance to perform it live with Lee Greenwood. And I can report to you that the guy loves Jesus, and I think he's really a neat Christian. So that was a neat experience. So let me start with kind of a patriotic note, since yesterday was the 4th of July, and do the full 3.5-minute version of God Bless the USA.
If tomorrow all the things were gone I'd worked for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife, I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea, from Detroit down to Houston and New York to LA, where there's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand and say that I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
Well, thank you very much. It's certainly been fun performing that, and it's a wonderful patriotic piece, and it reminds us that we live in a very wonderful country, and we can be thankful to God for that. Now, I was born in Mexico City, and so I'm a naturalized American citizen, but the truth of the matter is that my citizenship is actually not here. It's not in the USA. It's not in Mexico. You see, my citizenship is in a place where there's no sorrow, there's no disease, there's no sickness, there's no tears. It's citizenship in heaven. And so I'm just a pilgrim. I'm just a traveler. I'm just passing through. And although I get a chance to really live in a nice place, you know, everybody in every country in the whole world eventually discovers that this world is broken, that it's been damaged. Nobody can live a perfect life. Nobody can have that perfect family. Everybody has struggles. Everybody has difficulties. And at some point in your life, you're going to run into those challenges and those struggles. And we can understand what goes on in this world because of God's story. And so let me tell a little bit of God's story here. I'm sure y'all will recognize this. But this is one of the early sand story pieces that starts at the very beginning.
And the earth was without form and void. Darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. In the beginning.
So I'm sure you recognize that story. It's the creation. And one of the great things about that story is that it's a love story. Now, it's not so much the love that Adam had for Eve or that Eve had for Adam, but it was the love that God had for His creation. A love that He lavished in a special way on those that He created specifically to love. Now, if you read the Bible, and I highly recommend it, all the way from the beginning to the end, it's a little challenging because there's some dry spots in the middle, but if you persevere and you hang in there and read the whole thing through, you should come to the same conclusion that I did, that the thread that ties it all together is God's hesed, His mercy, His love for His people. How He pursued them, how He put up with them, how He cared for them. And even though we were living in a fractured and a fallen world, He kept wooing His people back. And we have that great privilege of being able to share this with a fallen and a broken world, that God is love and that He's reaching out to those people that have strayed far away from Him. I walked in and I noticed the verse on the banner, and I think it's a fabulous verse from Matthew chapter 11, where Jesus talks about how His house should be a house of prayer. But you know, one of the fun things about going to seminary is that you get a chance to spend a lot of time scrutinizing on one little passage. And I happened to run across that passage in Matthew, and it's the one where Jesus goes into the temple and He makes a whip, and He starts chasing the money changers and the merchandise people in the temple out of the courtyard. And I wondered, why did Jesus get so angry at these people? Some pastors will say that it's because they were carrying on merchandise, because they were selling things inside the temple grounds. Well, I hope that's not the case. I hope that God doesn't get mad at us for selling things inside the church, because I have a table in the back with merchandise on it. And I hope that Pastor doesn't chase me out with a whip. But see, I don't think that's what it's about. I think what it's about is that Jesus walked into the temple, and the temple was designed by God. God gave the instructions of the temple to Solomon, and Solomon built it, and then Herod rebuilt it. And there's a special design. The smallest area of the temple was the Holy of Holies, where God's Shekinah glory dwelt. And then the next size was the holy place, and that's where the priests could come in. Beyond that was another temple, and it was the temple of not a temple, but a courtyard, and that was the courtyard of the Israelites, where the Jews could come in. But the largest area, the area outside of that, was called the court of the Gentiles. And the purpose of the court of the Gentiles was so that the unbeliever, the foreigner, the non-Jew, the Gentile could come into the temple and pray and get to know the story of the one true living God. That was the purpose of it. We know this because when Jesus made that statement, when He got so angry and He says, "You have taken my Father's house and turned it into a den of thieves," He was chasing them out because He said this. He said, "My Father's house is supposed to be a place of prayer for all nations." And they had filled it up with tables. There was no room for the Gentiles. There was no room for the unbeliever. And unfortunately, in our day and age, there are too many churches that have become these little closed communities that have no room for the unbeliever. They have no room for the stranger, for the foreigner, for the Gentile. And so Jesus was chasing them out and quoting from Isaiah saying, "I want there to be room for all nations, that they can come and pray to the one true living God." People are broken. People are enslaved. People are in chains. And they need what we have here. When I was on the show, America's Got Talent, it was a challenge continually to try and come up with new pieces, particularly because they started giving me a little pushback. But I managed to find a song that they approved that it went way back to the 70s. Some of you older folks may remember this song that was written by and sung by a group called the Youngbloods. That was, come on people now, smile on your brother, everybody get together and love one another right now. It was actually Christian lyrics if you listen to them. But I wanted to perform that. And I wanted to perform it with the parable of the prodigal son. Of the father who had the young man, his son, that said, Dad, I'm done with this stupid ranch. I don't want to work here anymore. I want to take care of the cows. I don't want to take care of the sheep. So I'm out of here. I want to go to the big city, and I want to live my life the way I want to. And so the father, he said, Dad, give me my inheritance, and I'm out. So the father, with a heavy heart, gave him his inheritance, and he went on his way. You're familiar with the story. Jesus told the parable of the son who wound up feeding the pigs and being hungry and having to eat what the pigs were eating. And eventually he got out of the pigsty and said, you know, maybe my father won't take me back as a son, but perhaps I can come back as a servant. At least then I could get a clean shower once in a while and regular meals. And so he started home rehearsing this dialogue in his head. What he didn't know was that the father was already out on the road looking for the son, waiting for him to appear on the road. And when he saw the son, he did something terribly uncharacteristic for an old Jewish man. He hiked up his robes and he ran to the son, and embraced him and welcomed him home. I'm sure the son hadn't had a shower since he climbed out of the pigsty. But it didn't matter. He put a clean robe on him and he threw a party to welcome him home. And this is the story that God tells all the way through the scriptures of his redemption. So I wanted to tell that story on America's Got Talent. I got a little pushback. And so during rehearsals, the last image I was drawing was of a father embracing a son, and then I was going to turn the father into Jesus. And the producer said, well, you know, that's fine, but that last image, the beard doesn't look good on the guy. That's a bad, it just doesn't look good. Get rid of the beard. So during rehearsals, that's what I did, is I drew Jesus without the beard, except it didn't look like Jesus. But then when I got on stage, on live television, I thought to myself, why not? What are they going to do? Shoot me or what? So I went ahead and I drew Jesus, and 13 million Americans knew it was Jesus. But Howard Stern stands up and he says, Joe, who's that supposed to be? Before I got a chance to answer, Sharon Osbourne turns to him and says, Howard, that was Jesus. Howard said, no, that wasn't Jesus. And Howie Mandel pipes up and he says, Howard, you're Jewish. You wouldn't recognize Jesus if you saw him. So I didn't have to say anything. The name of Jesus was mentioned 9 times, and I was happy with that. But this is my favorite sand story. It's the sand story that I call the prodigal son. So there's the story, the lamb that wandered away from the fold, and Jesus leaves the 99 and goes off looking for the one that had strayed away. I identify with that story because for a long period of my life, I wandered away. I knew that God loved me. I knew His story. But I still decided to try and run my own life and to tell my own story. Now, stories not only become a part of our lives and a part of our way we communicate, it's the way we understand God. But when we read stories, and I love to read, I get to read a lot because I'm on airplanes and traveling, and now that you can carry a whole library in your pocket, I can read all kinds of things. But I remember once when I was on vacation and I was looking through one of these loaning libraries, and they had a book, and I picked it up and started leafing through it and read the first couple pages, and oh, it was a great one. I mean, it was a page turner. I couldn't put it down. And I read it all the way through lunch and all afternoon and all evening. I got in bed and I was reading, and 3 o'clock in the morning, this thing was a cliffhanger. And I got right to the end. I was going to figure out what was going to happen at the end of the story, one of those twists. And I turned the last page, and somebody had ripped the last 3 pages out of the book. Oh, no! 3 o'clock in the morning, I was ready to run out and find the book and buy it just so I could find out what happened. Well, you know, in your life, if you look at your life as a story, all of us would like it to be the kind of story where it's Leave It to Beaver, and the worst thing your kids ever do is chew gum in school. And, you want your life to be a perfect life. You want it to be a perfect marriage, a perfect job, a perfect career. And it doesn't happen. And something comes into your life that just doesn't make sense. And you think, I don't want this to be part of my story. This doesn't make sense. And John Donne, this fabulous poet who wrote a poem back in the 1600s called For Whom the Bell Tolls, he talked about how there were pages in the book. But the pages have been torn out and scattered, and who can read the book? Who can understand it if the pages are scattered? But then he goes on to say that the patient hand of the Father is going to collect all of those pages and put them back in the book and put them in order. And then when you read the book, it makes sense. And so when tragedy hits, when you have a bad diagnosis or a financial reversal, or you lose your job, or your kids go rebellious on you, and you struggle with some of these issues, you have to remember that if you take your story and you place it into God's story, then it becomes complete. And then you begin to understand what it is God is trying to do. Because He very clearly says that all things work together for good. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is good, but God is able to take even the difficult and the bad things and bring them together into the story so there's a good ending. And when you read the story of your life to the very end, you will be satisfied with what God did. Now, there was a song that was written almost 50 years ago, and it was written for a Broadway play in the UK and in England. But when I ran across it, it's been popular or modernized and brought into the 21st century, and I like the song. But when I started studying the story behind the story, I realized that the song was written about a prisoner, someone who had been chained, someone who had been in the throes of a difficult life, an addiction or a failure or something. And then all of a sudden he's set free. And what he is singing about is what it feels like after you've been in bondage to be free. And so this is the song that believers, that Christians ought to be able to sing. And most recently it was sung by Michael Bublé, and it's called Feelin' Good.
Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Breeze drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me. And I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. Fish in the sea, you know how I feel. River running free, you know how I feel. Blossom on a tree, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me. And I'm feeling good. Dragonfly out in the sun, you know what I mean, don't you know? Butterflies all having fun, you know what I mean. Sleep in peace when day is done, that's what I mean. And this whole world is a new world and a bold world for me. For me. Scent of the pine, you know how I feel. Oh, freedom is mine, and I know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life, it's a new life for me. And I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. I feel so good. I feel so good.
For somebody who's been in bondage and then been set free, it's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. At those times when we don't feel like things are working well and we need a reminder of what it is that is evidence of God's love for us, of His sacrifice for us. I know the place where I go is to the cross of Christ. Now you might think, what a morbid place to go to be reminded of God's love. But you see, that was where God demonstrated His great passion for us, in that He was willing to sacrifice His Son so that we could find forgiveness, so we could find the power to be able to lead a new life, so we could find the guarantee of eternal life in heaven. And there was a doubter, even in Jesus' close followers, those 12 who had been with him all of his ministry. And when Jesus came back from the dead, he appeared to some of his disciples, and they were amazed, they were astounded, and they went and told everybody else, "The Lord has risen." But there was one guy that wasn't buying it. That was Thomas. He said, "Sorry, unless I can take my finger and put it into the wound in the hand of Jesus, I'm not going to believe it." Well, just a few days later, Jesus appeared to Thomas. And he said, "Thomas, don't doubt. Here, put your finger in the wound in my hand." And fortunately, Thomas fell on his knees and cried out, "My Lord and my God." What a fabulous assurance that somebody genuinely loves you, that they would be willing to sacrifice their life for you. Even if you were the only one that needed it, he was willing to do that, and then walks with you. And so when we have this privilege of being able to share this good news, we can share it with all nations. And it's one of the reasons that this church, as I've mentioned this church in a lot of the places where I go, because I know that the Gentile, the unbeliever, the stranger, the foreigner is welcome here. It's a church that seeks to share that good news, that message, with the whole world. And so let me close with the same story that I performed in more places than I would have ever imagined. Places where I would never have been invited as a pastor or a missionary. Places where I didn't speak the language. And one of the most exciting places to me was I was invited to Kanpur, India, to the India Institute of Technology. It's sort of equivalent to MIT here in the United States, but just much harder to get into. And they had 4,000 students. The auditorium would only hold 2,000, and so I had to do it multiple times. And I asked them, what did they want me to perform? And they said, well, do whatever you want. So I did some things that were pertinent to India, and then I said, now I want to close with my favorite Zen story, because this is the story that changed my life. Now, this was a college, majority Hindu, a large population of Muslim, and maybe a smattering of Christians. And I got a chance to give this sermon without any words. And they got it. They got it. As a matter of fact, to this day, I still have about 350 or 400 Facebook friends that I made from Kanpur, India. And some of these dialogues are still going on. Little conversations about Jesus and what he can do for them. So let me close with this sand story. And I hope if you ever wind up in a place of doubt, that you will be reminded, like Thomas was, that the love of God is demonstrated best in the wounds of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.